And we are back. Right, it's great to see everybody. Thanks for being here. I am Angry Luigi. I'm your preferred Angry Luigi. And today, we're going to talk about the Virtual Boy. More specifically, I want to talk about the history of the Virtual Boy. I want to talk about what the console promised and how it failed on those promises. And I also want to get into the experience of what it's like to play the Virtual Boy and what the console itself is like. So to start off, what is the Virtual Boy? Well, it was Nintendo's first 3D console, originally released in 1995. And honestly, if you think about it, for something that old, it really seems like an amazing idea and an invention that's way ahead of its time. I mean, just check it out. Look at it. The similarities between the Virtual Boy and similar virtual reality systems that are on the market today, at least aesthetically, are very striking. You know, compare today's Oculus Rift S with the Virtual Boy. They're both essentially a pair of goggles, and they both have an embedded LCD display screen. You wear them on your head, and through different visual tricks and treats, your brain experiences a game in 3 dimensions. However, unlike the Oculus, which I would consider to be successful, the Virtual Boy was a complete commercial failure. For something that was just released in 1995, it was pulled from store shelves in 1996, and there were only 22 games released for it.
Wait till they get a load of me!
So why did it fail, if it's essentially an earlier version of the Oculus, and there's a lot of similarities with it? Well, one major difference right off the bat is how you actually wear the console.
Harder than a lot of the Marios I've done before, because you got.
The Oculus Rift straps to your head, which, you know, makes a lot of sense because it's essentially a pair of goggles. The Virtual Boy, however, it comes with this little stand, a pair of legs that hold the console up off a table. Then, I guess you're supposed to lean into it if you want to play it? I'm not really sure. To me, it makes sense that the Virtual Boy would have a head strap, and I was always surprised that the Virtual Boy didn't come with a head strap. I've seen pictures of people playing early prototypes of it, and they always have a head strap on. But all I know is that the Virtual Boy was not originally released with a head strap in the box, and, you know, for that reason, I don't have one. I just have the stand. This little diatribe about head straps is important because it helps summarize one of the main reasons for the commercial failure of the Virtual Boy. Comfort. The Virtual Boy is not comfortable to play. Look. It's a really awkward experience. You would either have to sit down at a coffee table with your butt on the floor, or have a high enough table that when you're sitting in a chair, you won't be too tall for the stand. Another reason that the console isn't comfortable, its graphics give people headaches. Everybody already knows that the graphics on the Virtual Boy aren't very good, so I don't want to spend a bunch of time reiterating the fact that they suck. Instead, I want to understand the forces behind why Nintendo made the decision to have the graphics be like they are. The Virtual Boy uses the concept of parallax to make a user experience 3D. Parallax, essentially, is the idea that objects farther away from you move more slowly than close-up objects. In this example, the person in the car sees the signs that are at the edge of the road move much more quickly than he sees the mountains far away in the background. And, you know, it kind of makes sense. Mountains are larger too, but it's the fact that the signs are so close that they're moving more quickly in relation to the viewer. The Virtual Boy also used this concept, and it engineered its graphics in a way to replicate parallax, and this is what helps make the games feel like they're in 3D. Now this footage isn't from the Virtual Boy, but it's just an animation that shows how a developer or a game designer might use parallax to make their game appear to be more 3-dimensional. But here, this is footage from the Virtual Boy, Mario's Tennis to be specific. It's one of the most recognizable Virtual Boy games, and it's also one of the most playable in terms of controls. So what do you notice about the graphics, other than the fact that Mario's constantly shaking his ass? Red. Everything is red. And that's the reason a lot of players get headaches from playing. It's the contrast between the very dark black background and the very bright red graphics. But this decision to be, monochromatic, everything being red, it doesn't necessarily have to be bad. If we think about the original Game Boy, which came out earlier in 1989, it also had a monochromatic display, and it's sort of this murky green color. The graphics aren't particularly crisp or attractive, but they get the job done, and I've never met anyone who complained about getting a headache from playing their Game Boy. Now, Nintendo chose to do a monochromatic screen again, and they could only select one color, and this time they chose a more interesting color. They chose red. And for what it's worth, I really like how they made this red color part of the branding. Not only is it the graphic display that's red, but it's also the console that's black and red. And I think it looks pretty cool together. But once you start playing the Virtual Boy, it really is a terrible playing experience. What gives? What's the reason that Nintendo chose a red monochromatic display? Well, you better believe that the answer is money. Point number 2 for the Virtual Boy's failure. So when Nintendo was developing the console and undergoing their pricing exercise, they determined that with an all-red LCD screen, the Virtual Boy could retail for $179.95, which it did. It sold for that much money in 1995. Accounting for inflation today, that's about $305 in 2020 money, which isn't cheap, but it's really not too expensive if you think about it. When the Nintendo Switch was first released, for example, it was selling for $299, so I'd say that this price is in a pretty acceptable range for a brand new Nintendo console that you're picking up on launch. Compare that to a full-color LCD screen system, which Nintendo was also comparing. According to them, it would have been so prohibitively expensive to make that for them to make a profit on each sale, they would have to sell each console for $500. $500 in 1995, that's about $849 in 2020, which is crazy. No one would buy that. The graphics, could have been great. They could have been much more, probably not realistic, but they would have been nicer to look at. So more people would have played the console for that reason, but with a price tag that large, it also would have failed commercially. It's just too expensive for most consumers to want to buy. Nintendo stepped back, thought about their options, and they took a chance. So they created a console that they gave to the public for a more affordable price, but it was a lot less playable as a result, and they lost. They lost on that risk. 1 year later, the Virtual Boy is gone, and you can't buy it anymore. Personally, I respect that Nintendo took a chance with this console. I'm also glad that they didn't give up on the idea of 3D gaming, because years later, they would give us the 3DS, which I think is a much better console, that retailed for $249 in 2011. So, pretty good price. Some people still complain about headaches from the 3DS, and there's the whole brain damage to young children thing. It's a significant improvement over its predecessor, and I think it's a really solid console, even though gaming and TV and things like that have really shifted away from the whole 3D thing. Now, you know what another really interesting thing about the Virtual Boy is? I think it's the controller. It's just amazing how symmetrical it is. It isn't some kind of fake symmetry either, like the GameCube or the N64 controller. Right in the initial planning phase, Nintendo sat down and they said, hey, we're going to make a controller for this thing, and it's going to be absolutely symmetrical. Now, the controls are terrible, they're still really confusing to play, but I really appreciate the idea behind it. It's like brutalism, but for gaming. And that's all I've got to say about the Virtual Boy. I hope you can walk away from this video feeling like you understand the Virtual Boy a little bit more, and that you understand the reasons why Nintendo would create a system like it in the first place. I've shown you some footage from Nintendo's commercials for the console, as well as some actual gameplay footage. But if you really want to experience the graphics for yourself, then I highly recommend either borrowing one from a friend or finding one out on your own. It looks like they're currently ranging from about $150-ish to much more expensive on eBay. So, they're still around, still kicking. Thanks again, guys. 2020, I am pleased to announce, is the year of Angry Luigi. This is official, this is government mandated. What can happen? I also want to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.